Good morning, and my name's Reverend Alison, and today's reading is John 12, verses 12 to 16. The next day, the great crowd that had come to the festival heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. So they took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him, shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel." Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, as it is written, "Do not be afraid, daughter of Zion. Look, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt." His disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, they remembered that these things had been written of him and had been done to him. There is so much packed into these 4 verses which require unpacking and comparison. The crowd are already excited. The Passover was coming, and the rumour had gone out that Jesus was coming into town. The crowd were waving palms and cheering on Jesus as Lord and King. Jesus finds a young donkey or colt in this gospel, as compared to sending out the disciples to find him one. This still seems to be a pre-arranged event that Jesus could well have engineered, but it cements and magnifies the cheers of Lord and King, as the crowd would have been familiar with Zechariah 9, verse 9, which reads, "Lo, your King comes to you, triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of the donkey." So this is a staged event. It is religious theatre, and one that was only understood correctly when looking back. The quote uses vocabulary of the Messiah, of the Anointed One, the King of Israel. And whether they spotted it or not, the crowd responded and greeted Jesus as King. Cloaks were thrown on the ground before him. Jesus sets off down the Kidron Valley to Jerusalem, down roads absolutely packed with pilgrims. It's a carnival procession. And Josephus reports Passover pilgrims living in tents outside the temple. This was like the People's Choice heading through the crowds and the tented village, heading for the pyramid stage at Glastonbury. Jerusalem is packed to bursting with pilgrims. Jesus is surrounded by his followers, by those he has preached to, healed and released, those whose lives have been transformed. And they were scooping up those who were desperate for change and hope along the way. This was an entirely kingly triumphal procession, heralding a curiously topsy-turvy kingdom and a strange wild king. And there's a huge element of fun and ridicule here, as Jesus is on a young donkey that's never been ridden. It would have been several sizes too small for him, like a grown man riding his kid's bike. But to understand the mockery and satire in this episode, we need to understand that this wasn't the only procession entering into Jerusalem that day. Under normal circumstances, about 1 cohort of soldiers would have been stationed in Jerusalem. This would have been approximately 500. But with each major pilgrimage festival, the population of Jerusalem skyrocketed, and with it both minor and major crime and the risk of an uprising. Examples of such incidents were widely recorded at the time, some involving huge numbers of people. Therefore, the military presence in Jerusalem also had to increase proportionately. And on this day, Pilate was entering town, firstly to prevent trouble, and secondly to hand over the ceremonial vestments to Caiaphas. So from the west we have a procession of gleaming armour and burnished leather, cavalrymen on beautifully powerful horses, the imperial eagle on display, foot soldiers pushing back the crowds with spears and taunts. Pilate didn't sneak quietly into town. This was to let the world that he had arrived. It was a procession of power and privilege. It demonstrated the economic, political and military authority of Pilate. It was letting everybody know that Pilate was in town, and with him the might of the Holy Roman Empire. This was very much about the kingdom of the world. Across the city, Jesus' procession enters Jerusalem. This is more than an act of prophetic symbolism, much more than a statement of messianic intent. This was a deliberate parody of the procession from the west. From the east, we get something entirely different. We see a very radical form of power. We see the offer of Jesus in the kingdom of God. The question then, as it is today, is which king are the crowds going to choose? And the story of Holy Week is the story of this choice being played out. First choosing one, then flipping to choose the other. It's the question that leads to the cross. But the answer has also been played out from the early post-resurrection appearances through the days of the early church and is playing out in our lives today. The answer is to choose Jesus and the kingdom of God any day and every day. It won't make life easy or problem-free, but not to choose Jesus and the kingdom of God means opting to make everything so much more difficult for yourself and those you love. To choose Jesus is, as the t-shirts worn by Wham and others said, is to choose life. It is to do no harm and to live a good and meaningful life and to change the world for the better.